My name is Claire Whitman. And I was 32 years old when I learned that silence can be sharper than screaming. It happened at 3 in the morning. I was not supposed to be home. My final client meeting had been scheduled to stretch past midnight on the other side of the city. I had already texted my fiancé, Daniel, telling him not to wait up. He replied with a sleepy little heart emoji and said he was staying at his ex-girlfriend Marcy's apartment after a wine night with old friends. At the time, I thought nothing of it. That was the kind of trust we had built. Or at least the kind I believed we had built. Daniel had a charming way of making every questionable thing sound harmless. Marcy wasn't his ex anymore. According to him, she was basically family. Their history was ancient. I had swallowed those words so many times. They had become part of the furniture of our relationship. Then the client canceled. No argument. No warning. Just a message from his assistant, saying the meeting would be moved to next week. So I bought a coffee I didn't need, drove through nearly empty streets, and pulled into my apartment garage a little before 3. The building was silent in that strange, heavyweight buildings become silent at night. Even the elevator seemed louder than usual. When I stepped inside my apartment, I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I only clicked on the small lamp near the couch. I remember setting my bag down. I remember loosening the clasp on my watch. Then I heard the key, a slow metallic scrape in the front door lock. I froze. Only one other person had a key. The door opened. Daniel stepped inside first, one shoe in his hand. His hair messy, his shirt wrinkled, his expression loose and careless, until he saw me sitting there in the half-dark. His whole body stopped. Then a woman's voice came from the hallway behind him. "Babe." "Who's that?" The sentence landed harder than a slap. She stepped into view a second later. Tall. Polished. Older than me by maybe 3 or 4 years. Marcy. I recognized her immediately from old photos Daniel claimed he never looked at anymore. She smelled like expensive perfume and whiskey. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. Nobody moved. That was the moment I understood something important. If I cried, they would comfort themselves. If I yelled, they would turn me into the unstable one. If I demanded answers, they would hand me rehearsed lies. So I did nothing. I leaned back against the couch and said, very calmly, "Long night." Daniel blinked like I had spoken in another language. Marcy recovered first. She smiled, but it was thin and nervous. "I just gave him a ride," she said. At 3 in the morning, I asked. Daniel finally found his voice. "Claire, it's not what it looks like." That sentence is always a confession wearing a cheap disguise. I nodded once, as if I believed him. Marcy glanced at Daniel. Daniel glanced at her. In that tiny exchange, I saw more intimacy than I had seen between us in weeks. Then I noticed his phone. The screen was still lit in his hand. A message thread was open. I couldn't read all of it, but I saw enough. "Tomorrow. Same place. Bring the file." Daniel tilted the phone away when he saw my eyes drop. And that was when the pain shifted. It was no longer just betrayal. It was danger. Marcy cleared her throat and said she should go. Daniel nodded too quickly. He followed her back into the hallway, mumbling that he would explain everything in a minute. The door closed. I sat there alone, listening to my own heartbeat. A weaker version of me would have chased him. A younger version would have begged for the truth. But the woman sitting in that apartment at 3 in the morning had spent years negotiating contracts with men who smiled while hiding knives behind their backs. So I waited, and while I waited, I began to remember things. Daniel asking too many questions about my new acquisition project. Daniel lingering near my desk. Daniel suddenly interested in my late meetings. My clients. My deadlines. When he came back, nearly 40 minutes later, I pretended to be exhausted. I let him talk in circles. I let him say Marcy was drunk. I let him say he only walked her upstairs because she felt unsafe. I let him lie until even he seemed tired of hearing himself. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep. By sunrise, I had already made my decision. I would not confront Daniel again. I would investigate him. The first thing I bought was a pair of cameras. Not because I enjoyed the idea of spying on the man I planned to marry, but because I had already learned something most people never understand until it's too late. Truth rarely arrives as a confession. It arrives as patterns. The cameras arrived the next afternoon. I installed one, near the front entrance, disguised as part of a decorative shelf. The second sat inside a ceramic vase in the living room, with a perfect view of my desk. Daniel never noticed. That should have bothered me. Instead, it told me exactly how little attention he paid to the space we supposedly shared. For the next 2 days, I acted normal. I made coffee. I asked about his day. I listened to stories that were probably half lies. And every night, when he fell asleep beside me, I watched him differently. The strangest part wasn't the anger. It was the distance. Once suspicion enters a relationship, affection becomes an autopsy. You stop seeing the person, you start seeing evidence. On the 3rd day, I got my first break. Daniel left his jacket draped across a kitchen chair. While he showered, his phone buzzed. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The screen lit up just long enough for a preview notification. Marcy, tomorrow night. Ça m'arrangement? My stomach tightened. Not because I was surprised, because confirmation always hurts more than suspicion. The next morning, Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving. The gesture felt rehearsed. By evening, I was ready. I told him I had an overnight strategy session with a client. He barely looked up from his phone. Good luck, he said. No disappointment. No attempt to spend time together. Nothing. That alone told me everything. At 7:30, I left the apartment. At 8, I parked 2 blocks away. At 8:22, Daniel exited the building. I watched from inside my car. He wasn't dressed like someone meeting friends. He wore the navy blazer I bought him for our engagement photos. The one he claimed was uncomfortable. Apparently, it wasn't uncomfortable for Marcy. He climbed into a rideshare. I waited 15 seconds before following. The route took us across town, toward a newer section of the city, filled with glass towers and luxury apartments. Eventually, the rideshare stopped outside a high-rise. Daniel stepped out, and there she was, Marcy, waiting for him. Not surprised to see him. Not excited. Comfortable. Routine, comfortable. The kind of comfortable that comes from repetition. She kissed his cheek. He slipped an arm around her waist. Then, both disappeared inside. I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm inside. Part of me wanted to expose them immediately. But another part, the smarter part, kept asking the same question. Why did I see the words, "Bring the file"? The affair was obvious now. But something else was happening. Something neither of them wanted me to know. I returned home. The apartment felt colder than usual. Empty. Quiet. At 11:48, my camera app buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the feed. Daniel was back. But he wasn't alone. Marcy entered behind him. Neither looked worried. Neither looked rushed. They moved through the apartment as if they owned it. My apartment. My furniture. My life. I watched them laugh in my living room. I watched Daniel open my refrigerator. I watched him pour wine into glasses. Then, something changed. Marcy's expression became serious. She pointed toward my office desk. My pulse immediately accelerated. Daniel walked over, opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. Me folder. The one containing preliminary notes for a corporate acquisition project. Not final documents. Not classified information. But information that absolutely did not belong in his hands. I leaned forward. Daniel opened the folder. Marcy pulled out her phone and started taking photographs. 1 page. 2 pages. 3. My heartbeat became deafening. This wasn't just cheating. This was theft. Every instinct I had developed over 10 years in corporate negotiations lit up simultaneously. Daniel wasn't betraying me emotionally. He was helping someone steal from me professionally. The realization changed everything. The relationship stopped mattering. Now it was a case. The next morning, I called someone I trusted. Ethan Mercer. Former military intelligence. Current private security consultant. One of the most detail-oriented people I had ever met. When I explained the situation, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was silence. Then he said, 1 sentence. Send me everything. By lunchtime, he had copies of the footage. By evening, he called back. I found Marcy. What do you mean? I found her company. My grip tightened around the phone. Go on. She works for one of your competitors. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. Every strange detail suddenly aligned. The questions, the timing, the photographs, the late-night meetings. Everything. There's more. Ethan said, tell me. She recently transferred into acquisitions. I sat very still. Because acquisitions was exactly the division competing against my project. Exactly. Not approximately. Exactly. The coincidence was impossible. This had been deliberate from the beginning. Do you think Daniel knows? Ethan asked. I stared through the office window. I think Daniel knows everything. After the call ended, I spent nearly an hour alone. Not working. Not moving. Just thinking. The hardest betrayals aren't committed by enemies. They're committed by people who learn how you think. People who learn your routines, your weaknesses, your trust. Daniel knew where I kept documents. Daniel knew my schedule. Daniel knew when I would be gone. He wasn't just helping Marcy. He was the access point. That night, I began planning, carefully, methodically. If they wanted information, I would give them information, just not the information they expected. Over the next 2 days, I created an entirely new project file. It looked authentic. It looked important. It looked confidential. And every critical number inside it was wrong. Not obviously wrong, just wrong enough to destroy a proposal built around it. Then I left the folder exactly where Daniel could find it. And I waited. Sometimes revenge isn't about striking back. Sometimes it's about letting people walk confidently into a trap they built for themselves. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed again. Motion detected. I opened the camera feed. Daniel was standing at my desk. Marcy beside him. The folder opened between them, and both of them smiling. They thought they were winning. I smiled too, because neither of them understood that the trap had already closed. The following Monday began exactly the way every important disaster begins. Quietly. No alarms. No dramatic phone calls. No flashing warning signs. Just an email. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing quarterly forecasts, when a notification appeared on my screen. A competitor had submitted a revised acquisition proposal. Normally, I would have ignored it. But Ethan had already warned me to watch closely. So I opened it, and there they were. My numbers. Or more accurately, the fake numbers I had planted. Every incorrect valuation. Every altered projection. Every subtle error. Copied perfectly. For a moment, I simply stared. Months of deception had been reduced to black text on a white screen. The proof was undeniable. Daniel and Marcy had taken the bait, and now they had delivered the evidence directly into my hands. I forwarded the proposal to Ethan. 30 seconds later, my phone rang. They used all of it. I smiled. Every page. Every page. For the first time since that night, at 3 a.m, I felt something close to relief. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Relief. Because uncertainty is exhausting. Truth, no matter how ugly, is simple. That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with my company's legal department. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. Normally, I loved the view. That day, I barely noticed it. 3 attorneys sat across from me, along with the head of corporate security. I laid everything on the table. The videos, the photographs, the timeline, the competitor proposal, the messages Ethan had helped uncover. No one interrupted. No one questioned the evidence. When I finished, the room remained silent. Finally, the senior attorney leaned back. Claire, he said carefully, this is one of the most complete internal theft cases I've ever seen. I looked down at the stack of documents. I wish it wasn't. His expression softened briefly. Then, the lawyer returned. The affair actually makes the corporate case easier. I raised an eyebrow. How? Because it establishes motive? I hated hearing it put that way. Not because it was wrong. Because it was true. Daniel hadn't simply fallen into bad decisions. He had chosen them repeatedly. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end of it, a plan existed. Not just to expose them, to destroy any possibility of denial. Every step would be documented. Every conversation recorded. Every piece of evidence authenticated. No loopholes. No escape routes. When I returned home that evening, Daniel was making dinner. The smell of garlic filled the kitchen. He smiled when he saw me. The same smile that had once made me feel safe. Now it felt like watching an actor forget he was still on stage. Long day, he asked. Very. He handed me a glass of wine. I accepted it. Then I watched him. Really watched him. The casual confidence. The easy smile. The complete lack of guilt. It amazed me. Not because he was lying. Because he had become comfortable lying. There is a difference. One is panic. The other is practice. Halfway through dinner, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The gesture almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. His fingers still felt familiar, but the man attached to them no longer did. "I've been thinking about the wedding," he said. My stomach tightened. "What about it?" His face brightened. "Maybe we should move it up." For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. Move it up? After everything? The audacity was breathtaking. "Why?" I asked. He shrugged. "Life's short." I stared at him. Life's short. A man helping steal from his fiancée while sleeping with another woman was talking about commitment. The irony nearly choked me. But I smiled. Because I needed him relaxed. Confident. "Blin. Maybe," I said softly. His smile widened. And for the first time, I realized something important. Daniel thought he was smarter than everyone around him. People like that always make the same mistake. They believe intelligence protects them from consequences. It doesn't. It simply makes the fall longer. 2 days later, the final piece arrived. One of Marcy's coworkers contacted corporate security anonymously. Apparently guilt was contagious. The coworker provided screenshots, dozens of them, private messages between Marcy and Daniel, payment records, bank transfers, photos, conversation, everything. I spent nearly an hour reading them. Each message felt like stepping on broken glass. Not because I still loved him, but because every line revealed how little he had respected me. One message stood out. "Marcy. Do you think Claire suspects anything?" Daniel. "Not a chance." Another. "Marcy. You're risking a lot." Daniel. "Worth it. She never notices anything." I reread that sentence 3 times. She never notices anything. A strange calm settled over me. Because those words explained everything. Daniel hadn't betrayed me because he hated me. He betrayed me because he underestimated me. The next morning, legal called. The confrontation was ready. A private dining room had been reserved at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Representatives from both companies would attend. Marcy would attend. Daniel would attend. Neither knew what was waiting. The trap wasn't just closing anymore. It was locked. That evening, I stood alone on my apartment balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly below. Behind me, Daniel moved around the kitchen, humming softly, acting normal, living inside a reality that was about to disappear. For a moment, I felt something unexpected. Sadness. Not for him. Not even for the relationship. For the future I once believed existed. The wedding invitations, the honeymoon plans, the children we talked about having someday. Those things had been real to me, even if they had never been real to him. The wind carried distant traffic sounds through the night. I closed my eyes. Then I let that future go. When I opened them again, I wasn't looking backward anymore. I was looking at the finish line. And in less than 48 hours, Daniel and Marcy would finally understand something they should have learned from the beginning. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest. It's the one quietly gathering evidence while everyone else believes they're winning. The restaurant was famous for discretion. Politicians held meetings there. CEOs negotiated acquisitions there. $1-million deals were signed there. And on that particular Thursday night, 2 people walked in believing they were attending another routine business discussion. They couldn't have been more wrong. I arrived 20 minutes early. The private dining room sat at the end of a secluded hallway. Soft lighting, dark wood walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Everything looked elegant, calm, controlled. Exactly the opposite of what was about to happen. Representatives from my company arrived first. Then the attorneys. Then corporate security. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew the evidence. The only people who didn't understand the situation were the 2 people at the center of it. At 7 o'clock sharp, the door opened. Marcy walked in first. She wore a fitted black dress and expensive heels. Confident, composed, victorious. For approximately 3 seconds. Then, she saw me. The change was immediate. Her smile disappeared. Her posture stiffened. The color drained from her face. She stopped walking. Behind her, another voice spoke. "Everything okay?" "Daniel." He stepped into the room and froze. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched. Heavy, uncomfortable, almost physical. Then I gestured toward 2 empty chairs. "Please," I said calmly. "Sit." Neither looked eager to comply, but both eventually did. The trap had officially closed. The lead attorney began. Professional, polite, measured. He thanked everyone for attending. Explained the purpose of the meeting. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the competitor proposal. alongside my original bait documents, page after page, side by side, identical, including every deliberate error. Marcy's expression tightened. Daniel looked confused. The attorney continued. Another folder appeared. This one contained security footage, stills, photos, timestamps, building access logs, camera screenshots. Every image showed the same thing. Daniel entering my apartment. Marcy entering my apartment. Daniel photographing documents. Marcy photographing documents. The evidence spoke louder than any accusation. Daniel's face turned white. Marcy stopped making eye contact entirely. Then came the final folder, the worst one. The anonymous screenshots, bank transfers, message, payments, conversation. The complete story, laid out in black and white. The room grew very quiet. Nobody needed explanations anymore. Nobody needed theories. Facts had replaced arguments. Marcy finally broke first. This isn't what it looks like. The sentence sounded pathetic, even before she finished saying it. One attorney actually blinked in disbelief, because everyone in the room knew exactly what it looked like. Daniel stared at the table, avoiding my eyes, avoiding everyone, avoiding reality. The lead attorney turned another page. A bank transfer. $5,000. Then another. $3,000. Then another. The pattern was obvious. Information exchanged for money. Trust exchanged for greed. A relationship exchanged for profit. Daniel finally looked up, but not at me. At Marcy. And what happened next told me everything. Not loyalty. Not support. Not concern. Anger. Pure anger. Because in that moment he realized she wasn't going to save him. And she realized he wasn't going to save her. The alliance vanished instantly. People who build relationships on betrayal eventually betray each other too. Neither seemed to understand that, until it was happening. The attorneys began discussing civil liability, corporate damages, confidentiality violations, financial restitution. The numbers were enormous. Daniel looked physically sick. Marcy appeared close to panic. I simply listened. Months earlier, I would have cried. Months earlier, I might have begged for explanations. Now I just watched. Eventually, the lead attorney placed a written statement on the table. A confession. Not emotional. Not dramatics. Just facts. They could sign voluntarily. Or face a much longer legal battle. Marcy lasted less than 2 minutes. Her hands shook as she reached for the pen. Daniel lasted 4. Then he signed 2. Just like that. Months of lies collapsed into a few inches of ink. The meeting ended shortly afterward. No shouting. No dramatic scenes. No cinematic speeches. Just consequences. Real consequences. The most powerful kind. As everyone stood, Daniel finally approached me. For the first time all evening. For the first time since 3 o'clock that morning, months ago, he looked smaller. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone seeing the ruins of their own choices. Claire. I raised a hand. He stopped speaking. I wasn't interested. Not anymore. Because explanations only matter before the truth comes out. Afterward, they're just excuses. His eyes filled with desperation. I never meant for this to happen. I almost laughed. Never meant for this to happen. As though months of choices had occurred accidentally. As though betrayal was weather. As though theft was gravity. No. I said quietly. You meant every step. The words hit harder than yelling ever could. Daniel lowered his head. Marcy was already standing near the door. Waiting. Alune. The woman he had risked everything for. Wouldn't even stand beside him anymore. There was something poetic about that. Neither left together. Neither looked at the other. Whatever fantasy they had built had died. The moment reality entered the room. After they were gone, I remained by the window. The city lights glittered below. Beautiful. Distant. Unaffected. The lead attorney approached. You okay? I considered the question carefully. Then I smiled. And for the first time in months, the smile felt genuine. Yeah. Because the strangest thing about revenge is that it rarely feels the way people imagine. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was freedom. The freedom of no longer wondering, no longer doubting, no longer carrying someone else's lies. A week later, I ended the engagement, officially. A month later, the legal settlements were finalized. 6 months later, I received the final restitution payment. And after that, I moved on. Not immediately. Not perfectly. But genuinely, my career flourished. My reputation remained intact. My life continued. The silence inside my apartment changed too. It no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. because it belonged entirely to me? Sometimes I still think about that night. The key turning in the lock, the doorway, the voice behind Daniel asking, "Baba, who's that?" At the time, it felt like the worst moment of my life. Looking back, I see it differently. It wasn't the moment my life fell apart. It was the moment I finally saw the truth. And once you see the truth clearly, everything that comes afterward becomes a choice. Daniel and Marcy made theirs, and I made mine. The difference is that I was the one who had to live with integrity afterward. They were the ones who had to live with consequences.